This is the 6th video in the beginning programming series, and in this video we're going to look at the idea of local versus global variables. For more information, visit jb.works and at the search prompt enter the TMT code shown at the bottom of the screen. So before we start looking at local versus global variables, let's just recap from the last video. So first of all, what are variables? There are two important things about variables. Number one is they hold information. They're a way of holding information in a program. And number two is variables let you change their values as a program runs. So a good analogy of this is if you look at the poster on the left-hand side, this is like a program that has no variables because once it's been printed or created, its value will never change. This poster will always say keep calm and carry on no matter what happens. Whereas on the other hand, you have the whiteboard, and the whiteboard is the equivalent of a program that uses variables because, of course, with a whiteboard, you can draw on it, you can rub bits out and change them, you can wipe it completely and then put something totally different. So that's a program that uses variables and is therefore very flexible. So variables give you the ability to put information into your programs and change it as the program runs. In Octagon, variables start with a slash character followed by a name, which is the name of the variable. So for example, slash height is a variable called height. And variable names must start with a letter, and they can contain basically letters from A to Z and numbers. And finally, variable names are not allowed to have spaces, so you can't put spaces in the name of a variable. And finally, before you can use a variable in Octagon, you have to do a thing called declaring it, which essentially means you're telling Octagon about that variable. So in Octagon, variables are declared by putting a D in front of the variable name. And then this is followed by the value. And the value tells Octagon what type of variable that's going to be. So for example, in this in this example down here, we have the prog_vars task, which in Octagon is where you declare variables, especially global variables. And we have a variable called name, and we have d/name, which tells Octagon we're declaring this variable. And then we set its value to Jack, and that tells Octagon that this is a text variable. So before a variable can be used, it has to be declared. So I think the best way to look at the idea of local versus global variables is to actually use them in a program. So as I said before, the prog_vars task in Octagon is where you declare variables. And any variables that are declared in that task are global. And what global means is that they can be used in any other part of the program, which is exactly what we've done. So we've got the name variables declared up here, and then we've used it down here, here, and down here. So if I run this program, everything prints beautifully, it's all fine. Now, if I create a variable here, and I'm going to call it local name. So new variable, which is local. So we go declare local name. And I'm going to call it Fred, capital Fred. So we now have a new variable declared inside the prog start task called local name. So I'm going to take that and I will copy it. And then I'm just going to say hello and local name. So if I then run the program, and there it is, hello Jack and Fred, Fred being the local name. Now before we put the second name that we created in the previous video into the by part of the program, which is prog stop. So let's do that now. So I'm going to take /local name, copy it, and I'm going to say and local name. So it should say by name and Fred, or by Jill and Fred. So now I'm going to run it, and you watch what happens. So instead we get an error, and what this error is saying is that on line 39, which is this guy here, the variable local name is out of scope. And what out of scope means is that it was declared somewhere else and it's not a global variable. So we declared local name here inside the prog start task, and then we used it inside the prog start task, and that was fine. But because we tried using it in another task, that's why we got the error. So if I take that out of there now and just run the program again, everything is fine. Now, if I wanted to make this local name variable a global variable, which means that any task can use it, I simply move the declaration from here up to the prog_vars task, because any variable declared in the prog_vars task is global. So now I run it, and it does exactly the same thing. But now I can take local name and I can put it down here in the prog stop task. And then I run it, and it works fine by Jill and Fred. So to summarize, a local variable is one that's declared inside a task other than the prog_vars task, and it can only be used inside the task in which it was declared. A global variable is one that is declared in the prog_vars task, and it can be used in any task in a program. For more information, visit jb.works.